If you could please follow me on Instagram. I'm getting very close to 1,000 followers, and I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Welcome to the world of Tales from the Trip.
Before I start the video, I have to make a disclaimer since it's not clearly obvious what I'm doing here on my YouTube channel. The reason I am reading bad trips and bad trips only is because I think they are much more interesting than positive stories. I'm not trying to misinform anyone on any of the drugs I read bad trips on. I have not once stated that you should or shouldn't do these drugs. If it comes off as misinformation, then I apologize, but I have stated many times on this channel through posts that I read these stories because I enjoy it, not because I want you to not do drugs and think psychedelics are bad. That is completely asinine that some people actually think that's what I'm doing. I know most of you don't believe that, which I thank you for, but there are a select few who have voiced their rude opinions about it. I should not have had to make this disclaimer, but I guess I had to. My videos will not change someone's decisions on if they are going to take certain drugs or not. I'm not here to be a drug safety channel either. I did not create it to be a spokesperson for the DARE program. I hope what I have just stated makes it abundantly clear that I'm not here to misinform, but to entertain. Thank you, and enjoy the video. Whenever I didn't have the money for heroin, I would get some methamphetamine from one of my roommates. I was pretty compulsive about the way I did meth, treating it more like a cocaine substitute. Over an 8-month period, I was sometimes shooting up 2 or 3 times daily, sometimes just picking the shit out of the carpet and shooting that. I was really only in it for the rush of the injection, the subsequent 12 hours after the head rush being altogether not my cup of tea. I never really got into staying up multiple days on meth. I generally had heroin to sleep on towards the end of the day, and methamphetamine has always been my least favorite drug. Unfortunately, for 8 months, I had an almost unlimited supply of this stuff. The effect meth created was something of a subtle euphoria, along with an unwavering energy. A high dosage would make me cough as it shot up my neck into my brain. Meth always made me feel like some sort of superhero, all of my senses honed to perfection, mind racing at 1,000 miles a minute. Trying to talk produced incoherent rapid speech similar to a manic episode. I might clean for a while, or wash the dishes, or do something I would generally hate doing otherwise. But in the end, I would always come back to compulsively playing video games, or watching sleep deprivation hallucinations crawl all over the floor. I'll use the term carpet monsters, as it is the only way I can even come close to describing what I was seeing. A methamphetamine overdose pins me to the floor in panic, my heart beating uncontrollably fast, hands going numb. I become very sure I'm going to die. The 3 times this happened, I was lucky enough to have heroin within the hour. Heroin always seemed to slow my heart rate and knock my ass out long enough to get past it. The only times I ever overdosed were times when I shot up large dosages within 2 to 4 hours of each other. Over the course of a few months, I began to notice every time I would get high, with meth exclusively, I would begin hearing voices. Sometimes they would be 3 drunken people in the next apartment, or it would be a bunch of police officers in the apartment on the other side of the building. Other times it would be my roommates whispering about me on the other side of my apartment. I began to believe I had some sort of meth-induced supersonic hearing ability. I was something of a prick about this. I would demand to know why my roommates were talking shit about me. They would stare at me like I was some sort of nutcase. So after a while, I took the hint and just stopped bugging them about it. On the particular day I had my psychotic break, I shot meth once in the morning and then again towards the afternoon. I didn't have any heroin. I was pissed off and spent most of the day gasping for air while dunking my head in cold water. Towards the evening, my roommates left me alone in the apartment for whatever reason. I lay on the only couch we had and stared at the ceiling, talking to the voices of the 3 drunken people through my wall and trying to feel less dope sick. We talked about nothing in particular, just generally about how good it was to be high. It was a pretty pleasant conversation at first, then the voices changed dramatically. It was as if the volume of the voices had turned up 10 decibels, and I was suddenly able to hear every single word they were saying. The two voices I heard sounded like they were using one of those creepy voice-changing devices you see in movies, very deep and authoritarian. They began by demanding to know everything about my roommates. Completely shocked, I began to spill everything. Then they informed me that they were with the government, that I was telepathic, and that I was to be taken to a secret military base to be trained and put to work for them unless I did exactly what they said. I was suddenly absolutely convinced what I was hearing was real. At this point, they mentioned I had 5 minutes to gather all of my things to leave the apartment. I mentioned I wanted to see my dad, and they told me to go to his house. They also told me to not try and contact my roommates for any reason whatsoever. So at this point, they were threatening me, as if they thought it would make me find things faster, and I'm tearing up the apartment violently, looking for both of my keys and jacket. After 4 minutes and 30 seconds, they said I would be killed if I didn't leave immediately. So I grabbed another button-down shirt, and I put it over the button-down shirt I was already wearing, and I bolted from the apartment without locking the door. I started walking. They began asking me if I was tweaked, so as a direct result, I began to act like I was tweaked. I would babble uncontrollably to myself out loud, and I would walk with a swagger or do other bizarre, insane things, like spitting into my hand and throwing it. It was not so much that I wanted to act that way, or even that I felt like acting that way. I was putting on a show for these people who very seriously wanted to abduct and erase my memory or just kill me if I were really telepathic. After 3 or 4 miles, I got too tired to put on a show anymore, and I began to act very rational, with the exemption of being unable to either stop them or believe they weren't real. I also believe that to any outside onlookers, I looked very fucked up. But I felt very rational, so I tried talking with them rationally. At this point, they became convinced they had to pick me up. So I agreed with them. I decided it probably wouldn't be so bad to live on a military base and do government work in the name of such a novel cause. They seemed to like this response and told me I was doing the right thing. So we began doing some exercises to strengthen my abilities, which fortunately became impossible because I began systematically blocking them from my memory. I later decided that this was probably an effect of the methamphetamine wearing off. While I couldn't block them from my memory completely, the volume seemed to turn down quite a bit. At this point, they told me to wait for a car that was to come get me, so after walking close to 10 miles, I sat down on the ground to begin working on keeping the connection open to avoid being killed. Somewhere around this time, the voices made the huge mistake of telling me they were planning on erasing my memory. So in a fit of a panic, I said the names of my roommates. Instantly, my roommates were on loudspeakers, asking what was up. Once I told them, my roommates became very concerned and told me to get away as fast as humanly possible. Also to not look at any street signs or landmarks. They also told me to turn off, something that would take too long to explain, but supposedly, non-drug using telepaths have the ability to turn on and off their powers. When they found out that I couldn't, they told me to go to sleep immediately, as a way of severing the connection. So I ran another 10 miles back across the city and turned in the opposite direction of my apartment. I really didn't know where I was going because I was looking down the whole time. But I ran into a crackhead. His name was George or something like that, and he wanted to know if I wanted to smoke crack. I really didn't. After all, I didn't have any money. Plus, I've never smoked crack, and I never will. So instead, we smoked a cig and talked a while. I mentioned I wanted a place to sleep, and he told me about a company van parked outside one of the buildings nearby that always left their window open. He couldn't fit through, but at the time, I was skinny enough to fit through that tiny window. So he gave me a boost through, and I opened the doors from the inside. I had to convince him not to steal the van's stereo system. I figured there might be a pretty good chance of me getting arrested if I was caught, and I didn't need theft added to the trespassing charges. He left shortly after I convinced him. So I laid down in the back of the van, on the floor, shivering all over. The meth was wearing off, but the voices were still going strong. I tried to ignore them and fall asleep, but it was too cold. To my surprise, George came back with a blanket. I thanked him about a dozen times before he left. At this point, I managed to fall asleep. When I woke up, it was just after dawn. I had only slept for about 4 hours, and it had been a restless sleep, my body aching all over the place from the long walk I had made the previous night. Out of fear of being caught, I quickly relocated to some bushes nearby where I tried to get a little more rest. After about 45 minutes of lying in the underbrush, I decided to make the long walk home. The voices were still with me, threatening me, and telling me that if I went to my apartment, I would be killed. At this point, I was convinced being dead wouldn't be so horrible and just ignored them. I thought about begging on the way back, but didn't because my pride held me back. I got weird looks from all the people waiting for their buses, just another junkie without a life to them. They wrote me off as soon as they saw me. Anyhow, I closed on my apartment, and when I got there, I was surprised to find my roommates already there. I told them about what happened, and they tried to console me and let me know that meth causes voices sometimes, and that the best thing to do is to simply ignore them. Of course, being in the trenches of paranoid psychosis, I didn't believe them. In my head, they were telling me they couldn't say the truth out loud, because then they would be on the hit list as well. I did some heroin as soon as we finished talking, and promptly passed out for 12 hours. In the aftermath of this first psychotic break, I had several more intense psychotic episodes, sometimes hallucinating black trucks or men in masks chasing me. With no doubt in my mind that the hallucinations were real, the only thing I could do was panic. It was only after that I went through detox that I was sure these voices were the product of methamphetamine psychosis, and even then, I still wasn't convinced 50% of the time. When detox failed to get rid of the voices, I became concerned and had myself committed to a mental hospital where I was diagnosed with psychosis SOC, meaning it might be schizophrenia. What separates schizophrenia from amphetamine psychosis is people with amphetamine psychosis experience a full range of emotions and are able to realize what they are hearing is not real. Schizophrenics cannot tell the difference between reality and what they hear or see. The biggest difference, however, is that methamphetamine psychosis will generally only last up to a few months. In my case, it has been about 2 and has since shown signs of dissipating. Treatment for methamphetamine psychosis involves taking antipsychotics as well as abstinence from all mind-altering chemicals. If I so much as take a puff of marijuana, the voices come back with fierce intensity. At one point, I was demanding my dad's gun to shoot invisible people before wrapping my head in tinfoil and running 15 miles. I bought what I thought from a trusted friend was Molly. 0.05 grams would get me rolling for hours. I was hooked. It soon progressed to an almost daily routine, and the amount necessary steadily climbed to about 1 gram a day. I became obsessive over looking for bugs on my skin, on my dogs, and in my carpet. I developed a phobia from this obsession. I could spend over 3 hours just looking at my leg, hunting for the bugs that had taken over my life, along with this wonder powder and cocaine. Hygiene, food, sleep, and hydration had all been put on the back burner. I went up to 8 days with no sleep, 2 days without food, and I was constantly thirsty, but I never did anything to fix those problems because I didn't have a single care in the world but my powders. I was consumed. I made excuses to keep getting it, lying to my girlfriend, to my friends, and my parents. One particular evening, I blew a half gram of coke mixed with a half a gram of this new shit in less than 3 hours. I had been feeling great because I had been rolling nuts all day. I had been productive. My girlfriend and I had a great time together. I went outside for the usual pre-sleep cigarette. I felt a bug crawling on me, which at this point was not out of the ordinary. This time, I saw it though. I stood, too scared to move, as I watched what I believed was a parasite invade my body. I lost touch with reality. I went to the doctor and was diagnosed with delusions of parasitosis. I didn't believe it and made my parents take me to the hospital for blood work just to make sure. At that point, it had been 2 hours since I saw the parasite. I was sobering up and passed out in the exam room. I woke up being taken by a nurse to the hospital psychiatric center. I stayed there for 4 days. Apparently everything I'd been feeling, seeing, and hearing were all hallucinations and delusions. Distant voices that were never distinguishable, paranoia, crawling and itching skin, rashes, and wriggling hair all over. I had a psychotic break and went into a drug-induced psychosis. I am now diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, bipolar 1 with somatic and auditory delusions and hallucinations, paranoid schizoactive disorder, and liver and kidney malfunctions ultimately leading to failure. I found out within the last 24 hours what my buddy and I had thought was Molly was really bath salts. I got all my friends, girlfriend, and some coworkers hooked on it too. I flushed it down the toilet already. In all, this stuff was fun to do, but ultimately not worth it. I am currently paranoid, hallucinating, and convinced that there are bugs on my legs. It is super addictive and potentially fatal. I am learning the hard way. Please be careful. I will never be the same person that I was. Hi, my name is Cheryl. I am a 31-year-old stay-at-home mom. Prior to this time, I had done 1 hit of LSD 5 years ago and had a good time with it. It took forever to come down. I felt the effects the next day, but otherwise good. I had smoked pot maybe 5 times in my life. I like to drink to have fun, although I don't believe you have to do drugs to have fun. I had suffered from depression on and off throughout my life, and in the last 10 years had experienced some panic attacks. This is my story. In the end of August 2003, my husband and I went to Jamaica for his friend's wedding. I was anxious about the trip, leaving my kids, a boy, 6, and a girl, 3, but he really wanted me to go. 2 weeks before the trip, I started taking an antidepressant and decided not to take it the week we were in Jamaica. The day before we left, I had a really bad feeling about the trip and left a letter for my kids in case something happened to us, telling them how much I loved them, etc. The first day in Jamaica, I got really drunk on their banana daiquiris, and the next day, I had the worst hangover of my life. So I decided I would smoke pot all day since I couldn't drink. Then the next night, I made the biggest mistake of my life. My husband and his friends were sitting around the pool and offered me some acid. I was on vacation. I figured, what the hell? Well, his friends give me 2 hits of acid, 1 brown, 1 white. This is when my hell begins. After taking the LSD and sitting around for a while, I remember walking around with him and a couple of his friends and everything feeling out of touch. When we went back to our room and laid down, it was like I went inside myself and I felt different personalities emerging, and I felt that my husband was trying to pick the one he wanted. I was overcome with the fear that the real me was dying and that my husband was evil and the devil was coming into me. That was the first of many hallucinations I had for the next 3 months. We got home safely from Jamaica and I was still out of it. 2 days after getting home, I was admitted to the mental ward for 10 days. I was assigned a psychiatrist and he diagnosed me with LSD-induced psychosis. That was the first of 5 trips to the mental ward from September through the end of November. The time I spent there was an experience in itself too. Many different kinds of people there, drug addicts, suicidal people, and severely depressed people. It was not what I had always believed it to be. I was on 3 different antipsychotic drugs. One, I think it was Haldol. It made me a zombie, and I was so depressed because during all those months, I couldn't take care of my children. I couldn't even drive a car. It came to a point that I just wanted to commit suicide. I couldn't do that though, because the love I have for my children carried me through. My nurses can attest to that. I forgot my own name one time I was in the hospital, but I knew I had my kids. Well, here it is, May 2004, and I have not went psychotic since the end of November, and I have been off antipsychotic meds for 6 weeks. The only thing prescribed to me right now is Zoloft. But I've been severely depressed and have no energy and have gained 24 pounds in the last 5 months. I have been living in fear of relapsing and disrupting my children's lives again and being locked up in the mental ward. Last night, I had such a vivid nightmare. I woke up and had a full-blown panic attack. It was like reliving my ordeal in Jamaica with my personalities. My psychologist made me feel much better today. She said anyone that has lived through a traumatic experience will have times that are tougher than others. It's kind of like I have PTSD now. On top of all I've mentioned above, we have hospital bills totaling $2,000 and the added cost of daycare for my children for the 3 months I couldn't take care of them. It ended up being a very expensive trip. Sorry this is such a long story, but I have wanted my voice to be heard on this subject, and I have found an outlet here. I'll never underestimate anything that can have an effect on my mental stability, and I warn everyone that reads this to think about it too. Even if the chance is 1 in 1,000 of this happening to you, do you want to gamble with your mind? Thank God, I got mine back.